Warui Deshou.
You wouldn't download a car. Why would you download this
Or
movie?
would I?
Hey everybody, welcome back to Companion Piece. This is episode 2. I am the subtle doctor, the husbando of the companionship, and along with me here is my waifu.
Hello.
This is Annie. She's back.
Yes.
And on this episode of Companion Piece, we are going to be diving into the 2016 Production I.G anime film, Miss Hokusai. And I have to say, we watched it last night, and it's quite something to watch a really excellent film with your best friend / spouse and then not be able to talk about it.
Yeah, that was not fun. We just sort of stared at each other for a long time, and we're like, well,
So,
guess we shouldn't start tonight because it's 1 a.m, but wow.
pretty good.
Yeah. Very vague.
Yeah.
Painful.
But judging by Annie's stack of notes here, I think we're gonna have a lot to say.
Yeah, so obviously Paprika was my first venture into this, and I came in cold and no note taking. Felt very underprepared. I probably swung a little too far in the opposite direction here, but there's so much going on in this movie, and there's so much. I mean, because it's based on historical figures, there's just so much to uncover and to, that makes the setting so much more rich if you're aware of it. And yeah, so I wanted to be aware. So notes, many notes.
So before we get into discussing the particulars of the film, let's just briefly set it up for those who don't know. I mentioned earlier it was a 2016 Production I.G film. It's based on a manga called Sarusubiri by Hinako Sugiura, who passed away, I believe, in 2005, unfortunately, due to complications from cancer. But she did, for I think most of her manga career, do historical works based on the Edo period, and Miss Hokusai is also one of those. It is also directed by Kei Chihara at IG, who directed the film Colorful, which I haven't seen but would like to see. But it's one of those that every time I read the description, I just think to myself, I'm not sure if I'm emotionally prepared for this movie. It seems very sad. So this film, it takes place in very late Edo period, right?
Yes.
Japan.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned the Edo period, Chuck, because I feel like it's so central to the movie.
Okay.
And what happens in the movie. And I read an interview that the director did with Mary Sue, and he hits on it, several times. So I really think we should talk a little bit about the Edo period. Well, obviously it's set in the Edo period because that's when it happened. But what are some of the qualities of that period that are at play in the film in very distinct ways? Some important things to know about the period, and sorry if everybody already knows these things, but it's new to me. So, it started in 1603.
We only know about them from Rurouni Kenshin. This is the the big Meiji Revolution that Kenshin took part in. After
dots connected.
Yeah, so the the epilogue in the film leaves off in like the 1870s, which is right before, you know, the Tokugawa shogunate, the shogun's government will fall, and the Meiji government will take its place and sort of help modernize Japan.
Okay, so the Edo period.
Yes.
Began in 1603 with the consolidation of the shogunate. You had more of a feudal system before then, and it ended with the fall of Edo in 1868. The period was characterized by stability. It was a very tight system. Economically, you had a lot of growth. You had a very strict social order and a caste system. There was a real push for isolationism.
Oh, for sure.
In terms of foreign policy. The population was very stable. You did not have wars going on because you didn't have feudal lords fighting against feudal lords constantly. And because of all this stability and growth and everything, the arts and culture had a real explosion during this time. Because, of course, when people aren't fighting wars and they have money, they can turn to other things. So one thing that was really interesting to me that I learned, it was a very isolationist time. Trade was tightly restricted. There was one port, the Dutch port in Nagasaki Harbor.
Right.
Dejima, where people were able to come in and out, and the only people that were able to come in and out were China, the Dutch East India Company, and for a teeny bit of time, the English. However, and which, can I just say, based on how things went in the New World, can you really blame them for just blasting foreigners whenever they saw them? I mean,
Yeah, they were right.
So anyway, I found it so interesting that despite the fact that you have this isolationism happening, in the arts and sciences, you saw a lot of Western influence, which I thought was just so interesting, because through trade with the Dutch, who I guess were less forceful than some of their other European counterparts, you had
Dutch being chill.
Yeah.
A theme that continues to this day.
You had, as far as the arts went, Western takes on perspective kind of started being introduced. You saw it in the art of Hokusai, in particular. So that is the Edo period and how it related to the arts in particular. Moving from the Edo period.
Well, can we, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things I think is neat, about the Edo period and you mentioned the isolation, Western influence, we found in this movie, creeped into the arts, but it did not really affect customs too much at this point, or the wardrobe very much at this point. The haircuts were still very traditional. The men, had the top knots and shaved the top of their heads, and so in some ways you watch this movie and you think about how kind of the rest of the world was at that time, in the early 19th century. And it's just an interesting contrast to think about the way that culture and technology was moving around the world. But it took Japan, I think, a really, really long time to sort of seem like it was lagging behind, because this is a culture and society that was established for a long, long time, and for a long time they were ahead of everyone else in those respects. Well,
and there were a lot of technological advancements happening. I mean, the movie doesn't really hone in on them, but with what is the word? Automation, sort of early robotics. That was, again, through the sciences.
They were making anime
that was happening
in that period.
There were definitely advancements happening. I'm not too familiar, honestly, with the early 1800s, even in the States. when did cars happen? I don't really remember.
I don't know either.
So I don't know how different it was.
We're history failures when it comes to...
But ask me about the Edo period, because I can tell you about the Edo period.
Ask me about my Tokugawa tattoo.
But it's not real. We're not really transitioning out of it. But one of the major pushes that was happening in art during the time was the whole process of ukiyo-e, which was the process by which Hokusai and many artists of the time worked at printmaking with woodblock prints. It was an extremely popular style and one that became very influential around the world, because you had people like Van Gogh and other major Western artists who were influenced by this style, because, you know, eventually trade opened up more and people became sort of Japanophiles artistically so early on.
You have Van Gogh showing up in other period anime,
oh,
like Samurai Champloo, or I think
Okay.
doesn't he sneak into the country or something like that? It's been a while since I've seen that episode, but Van Gogh is present.
Yes, well, and he, you know, reportedly, yes, was influenced by these kind of works, and you can see it, I feel like, in a lot of the work of that time. But so something again connected with this interview with Hara and Mary Sue. Now he's very humble, is the impression that I got, both from the interview and we watched a little bit of the special features after. He seems extremely self-effacing. You know, he talks a lot about the creator of the manga and, you know, her abilities and how he was jealous of them. And when the Mary Sue asked him about being an artist, he was quick to say that he does not consider himself an artist. He considers himself an artisan. And he talked about the way that the animation industry is echoed in the process of ukiyo-e and printmaking, that you had, at that point, you had a publisher who was responsible for commissioning and promoting things, like a producer. You had the artists who would make the images. You had the wood carvers who would prepare the blocks. You had the printers who would make the actual print onto the paper, and it was just a team effort. And so he wanted to, again, show how that echoes what he does in directing, and that, yes, that you have so many people involved. It's a unique kind of art piece that comes out of that. You're basing it on someone else's work. You're creating a unique story. You have people who have to make the characters, and it's all... And
the storyboarder, which Hara did as well. Sometimes the director doesn't do that, but I think pretty often the director will do the storyboarding.
It's a very collectivist kind of process,
yes,
which I think is not as typical culturally. I mean, you think of the US as a very individualistic kind of mindset. Not that, I mean, of course you have many things in our country that are done collectively, but it's a lot of times when you hear them spoken about, it's a single entity who kind of gets the accolades for these things.
We love our auteurs here.
Yeah, and so it was unique and very cool to hear a director speaking about just, I mean, and of course, he's a humble man. I mean, he's extremely gifted and responsible for a large part of this process. But again, to reflect that idea that so many people are involved and that's how it's been with art for centuries. We just sort of forget to view it that way. You had, even like, you know, Michelangelo had dozens of, apprentices, you know, filling in color and all. So yes, it's not only the single artist who goes out and creates a thing. A lot of times you have, yes, many people involved.
Absolutely. And even this speaks to the humility of the director, as well. Like the family of the mangaka was involved. Like he reached out to them for their blessing before embarking on production in 2013. Like, he wrote them a long letter describing like his passion for the artist's work and how much he really, really wanted to make the story. And that just, I think, speaks to the collective mindset that you're talking about, and how anime production is approached there.
Yeah. One more thing before we get to the movie.
Okay.
So I wanted
saying a lot
to,
of names.
So painful. So many names that I don't know how to pronounce. Which really, we were in a hurry to talk about this. I feel like I should have sat with YouTube and looked up pronunciations and listened to them over and over until I could say them totally properly. So, let's talk a little bit about the historic Hokusai and OA.
Okay. These are the main two characters in the film. And to be quite honest, this is going to be all you. I pass you the ball and I let you run with it because I don't know too much about the historical figures.
Okay. I love art. It's kind of a thing for me.
You are an artist.
Well, very not productive artist.
A drawer and a painter.
Okay. And so, but even if you don't have that, think of a painting of a Japanese wave. I guarantee you the image that you have in your head, it is Hokusai.
It's incredibly familiar.
Yes, it's iconic. And that is the man that we're talking about who produced that piece. He was born around 1760-ish, as we often don't exactly know the dates for these things. He began painting at 6, was the son of a mirror maker, and that's probably how he ended up in the arts, because again, you had such a tightly structured society. There wasn't a lot of movement. It's not like you could wake up and be like, I'm a farmer, but you know what? I'm going to become an artist. So, he went by over 30 names over the course of his lifetime. And and while it was not atypical for artists to have several names that they were known by, he had more than any other known artist, for sure.
Like a hip-hop star.
Like Prince.
Lots of AKAs.
Yes. And as you would imagine, I think, a lot of these name changes reflected stylistic or production kind of changes that were significant. But we'll just call him Hokusai.
Yes.
He was, in fact, as depicted in the movie, a showman, and he had a gift for self-promotion. The 600-foot portrait that he did of Daruma in the movie, that really happened. He had it was like a 600-foot portrait done with brooms and buckets of ink.
It's like the opening
he did for the court.
The opening scene of the movie, right?
Yes. So that was a real thing. Yes, showmanship. And there's another story that he was competing against a more traditional artist for the court to see, who was the best. And he painted a blue, like, wavy line on paper, and then he painted chickens' feet red and had them run across the paper. He said it was a landscape of the Tatsuta River with maple leaves, and he won the competition. So,
wow, that bullshit artistry also depicted in the film by him.
Isn't that
by the
great?
Character. That's amazing.
I love it.
That's a great story.
Yes. So, just the fact that these stories, float around this many centuries after his death, like, obviously he had that spark.
Yeah.
And
connected with people, these things.
Yes. So the work he's best known for, obviously, is I would say the Great Wave off Kanagawa, which is that painting that, of course, you see depicted in the movie as well.
Yeah.
And it was part of a series called 36 Views of Mount Fuji. He did another series called 100...
It's like a BuzzFeed article.
called 100 Views of Mount Fuji. And apparently, his obsession with Mount Fuji in real life was related to his religious beliefs, as was his name, because Hokusai means North Studio, and is actually an abbreviation for North Star Studio. And the North Star was associated with a deity, and Mount Fuji was linked traditionally with eternal life. You had folk tales where there was an elixir of life on the peak of the mountain, and it was seen as a source of secret immortality. And if you think about it, you know, his obsession with Mount Fuji, sort of in an artistic sense, it gave him immortality. You know,
Yes.
We know who he is.
Yeah.
We're making movies about him.
People will continue to know.
His art is iconic and highly influential, and so there you go. Another genre of the ukiyo-e was called shunga, and it was the erotica. Okay, this is going to be a 6 degrees of. You might not remember. There's a painting that I knew about. You know, I think it's fairly well known, but some friends who have seen it said they first saw it in Mad Men because Bert has it in his office.
Oh.
The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife. That is Hokusai.
Oh, wow.
And we joke about it being early tentacle porn because it really it is. It's graphic depiction of octopi pleasuring a woman. So
the Kurt Eichenwald special.
Yeah. So that is his most famous piece of shunga. But it was a very popular genre. And I found this interesting, across social classes and across genders. You know, it was common for brides to be gifted with shunga on their wedding day, you know, for wedding gifts. And yes, so very, very popular and not at all, you know, hush hush. So his daughter, his real historical daughter, Oe, who was indeed also a painter in her own right. She worked as a production assistant to her father, as in the movie. Mm-hmm. It's how she got her start. I found it very useful and interesting to know. This information I got from an article in Japan Times called Painting Women of Japan. There was a list of women artists compiled in 1858, and it reflected that there were around 80 women painters active around the country. So during the Edo period, we have the late Edo, there were women painters active. Obviously, as you would expect, they didn't get the same attention as their counterparts. Although you had some. There were, I think, only 2 women that served as artists to the imperial household, but you did have some. But we're really only recently getting to a time where we explore their work and more is known about it. And you've had some exhibitions of what they've done, but they're just not as remembered.
You mean women are underrepresented in history? How could this be?
I know. Unreal. Yes. You heard it here first.
Breaking news.
So many of the women, as you would expect, who were artists during this time, were daughters of artists, artisans, and came into it that way. Her father was married twice, and the little girl depicted as her sister in the movie,
Onao.
She really did have a sister named Onao. Now, nothing is really known about her except her name, but she was a real little human being. So she was an extremely skilled painter of... There were several forms of ukiyo-e. One form was called bijinga. Eijin-Ga. And it was the depiction of beautiful women.
Okay.
She was especially known for that. And you see her in the movie, painting courtesans and that kind of thing. And yes, she excelled in that. And he apparently her father really did say that his work in that area was not a match for hers because hers was so incredible.
I really like these details being represented in the movie.
Yeah, I know. And you could see in the special features the extreme attention to detail that they had, for reflecting the period historically. So obviously they just delved very deeply into the biographical details of these people to pull in all of this history.
And the architecture, to get the drawings right of the buildings and the layouts of the city and things. They did their fair share of scouting and sort of working their bodies into odd angles to get different perspectives on doorways and things like that.
Yeah. So it's said that she was also eccentric like her father, charitable, and that she wanted to become a female Jian sage. That's some kind of religious thing that I haven't looked up, but
this is where the movie...
Well, I did look it up, but I couldn't tell you all about it at this point.
This is the movie that I think we'll talk about it. It departs from that, I think, in some ways.
I think otherworldliness, the seeing of visions, and I think that was it was a huge part of the movie. So I think they were hitting on that aspect of her and her father's personalities.
Yes. No, you're right about that.
Their interest in the religious. And yes, so she was a painter. I find it amusing. She married an artist in 1824. They didn't get along because she found him amusingly bad artist. So they divorced 1827, and she did live with her father then for the rest of her life, as the movie.
He couldn't stand to be around the inferior word.
Well, yeah, and she's so scornful in the movie, of those who are derivative or just yes. I love that they really did capture that obviously real characteristic about her. So that is her. A lot of her work is depicted, you see it in the credits at the end of the movie. Beauty fulling cloth in the moonlight, Yoshiwara night scene, which I think is one of the ones that they show at the end. And she hid her name in it. There's the writing on the lanterns sort of puts her name into the scene, which I find very cool. Kurua in grid view, 3 women playing musical instruments. You had a lot of, courtesans. Oh, courtesans showing themselves to the strollers through the grill. I think that's another one that they showed. And I think there was a part in the movie where when I saw it, I recognized that painting. So those are some of her better known works. Hey, we watched a movie. We didn't just learn things about history that were cool.
This has been our podcast that we recorded from reading Wikipedia.
But really, if we just stopped here and you watch the movie now with all of that information, it really enriches the watching of the film. It's
a very good point, actually. So we've been talking a lot about the context for this movie. We've been saying a lot of names,
so many names,
and places and art styles. But if you are coming into this cold and don't know what Miss Hokusai is about, we'll try to summarize it for you here before we get into the nitty gritty of our own interpretations of the movie and things that we thought were significant. So this is a story of Oe, who is the daughter of the famous artist Hokusai, who in this film, his first name is Tetsuzo, and she often just calls her father Tetsuzo, like he's just a guy instead of her dad, her Otosan. And perhaps this is a language that changed when the historical period changed or whatever. But this is really her story chiefly. this is about like a year or maybe a little more in her life, her life as an artist, kind of her growing in that area, her life as a daughter, her relationship with her father Tetsuzo and her mother, plays out, and the dynamic there is interesting. It's about her life as a big sister. We mentioned Onao. In this film, she is the younger daughter again of Tetsuzo, and she has been born blind, and so you have kind of an interesting family dynamic, and a sad family dynamic happening there that we will get into between Oe, Onao, and their father. As far as like summarizing the movie further, I mean, I think it's not a movie where like a whole bunch of significant things happen. There's no huge battle or external conflict. It is, again, just a year in or so in this woman's life, in this particularly intriguing period of Japanese history. So what did we think of this movie? I guess we'll start it off like I started off the Paprika discussion last time. Like, Annie, when you, a year from now, think of this film, Miss Hokusai, what are you going to think about? What stands out to you?
Okay. There were a few currents that really pulled me in, starting with family and the ways that imperfect people sort of show their love and relate to one another, and feeding into that, as this was a family of artists, ideas about perception and inspiration, where that comes and how we relay that to one another. Those were the major points for me that will stick out.
Yeah, both of those definitely were things that were significant to me. I thought that the way that the movie captured this kind of family life it felt very real. It felt, it's not a perfect family, but it's also, there's no like villains necessarily out and out in the family, although I guess you could argue about Tetsuzo as a father, and I probably will later on when we get to that. But yeah, I thought that the depiction of the family was really, really good. That will stick with me. It definitely stuff about the creative process and inspiration, like that, I thought was incredibly fascinating. This movie could be saying something rather interesting about the nature of reality. So I think I at least like picked up on kind of a metaphysical thread
Sure.
in the movie, and I guess I wanted to know what you thought of that, if you have any thoughts on that in particular, because there are several scenes in the movie where things like dragons and spirits, things come from paintings to visit our world, but it's also shown that not everybody can see them, or at least not everyone sees them or experiences them in the same way. When these sorts of things happen, these, I guess the right term is magical realist things happen in film. I wonder, do you think this is chiefly symbolic or allegorical, or is that the utility for these things to the sole utility for these things to be present in the movie? Or do you think there's something else happening?
No, I don't think that's their sole function. Of course, they're related to sort of the coming down of inspiration that there's a lot of work and process involved, but at some point you're waiting for this moment that is beyond the physical reality. But also, Hara had mentioned in his interview that Sugiura was reported to have seen visions. I think that fact, the idea of inspiration as outside the physical, and the time period where things like Buddhism and Shinto were strongly at play, I think that a spiritual kind of otherworldly element was just necessary to the movie. And these two artists were religious and believed in otherworldly things. So, I think the place for them was necessary in the movie. I don't think they're just a shorthand for something. I think there's a combination of reasons that they existed in the movie, although they did serve that function as well.
I definitely agree. I'm glad that you also agree. Being much smarter than me, I was worried that you would come.
Stop it!
You would come over the top of like, well, you know what? Like,
my God.
Here's the reason these things are in, and then I would just feel dumb, for concocting this theory. But yes, I think like the presence of supernatural beings and kind of the way that they interact with natural ones like us was kind of amazing in that movie. I felt like art was kind of a portal for those things to kind of come into this part of reality. Maybe because to make art, artists are reaching toward that for inspiration.
Yeah, that this idea that there's like a plane beyond what is perceivable to, what is the word that she used for the young man who
brazen.
The brazen.
She just called this one like up and coming artist brazen because he was like he just such a hack, she thought.
Yes, and so you have this this separation between art that's merely popular and art that is produced by people who have a connection to this whatever it is beyond the veil. And that distinction is very important to her. And you see that distinction really fleshed out when they all go to see the courtesan who is having an out-of-body experience. And I wanted to talk about, this is another thing that's useful to know. There was a popular belief during this time that there was something called ikirio. They were living ghosts. Mm-hmm. So that you could have a spirit come out of your body and go enact things in the world separate from your awareness of it or any real relation to you. And so you have this courtesan who is experiencing this, and it's she and her father who see it. And you don't really even, at some point...
She being OA.
Yes,
and her father.
OA and her father see it. The young man, I don't know, like there's a point at which he starts back, but you never really get a sense that he perceived the same things that they were perceiving. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of a lovely visual scene of this idea that there are those who perceive and there are those who don't perceive. And there's a difference in the kind of art that they are capable of creating.
Which I think, will help the movie, despite like a dragon being in the clouds and Ikirio, which by the way, can I just say Ikirio, probably the number one most convenient excuse for drunk men. It wasn't me that you caught with that lady. It was an Ikirio. I was asleep at my friend's house. But no, like despite the appearance of these things, like the fact that they're not just wandering around and interacting with everyone, that there are only certain people, like people with imagination, people with inspiration, spiritual people, connected people, like they kind of have access. And sometimes it can look like madness. You have one lady who is, for whatever reason, because there's something wrong with a painting that OA has done, not necessarily something wrong, but something incomplete. Her father says, like, it's causing the owner of the painting's wife to become very disturbed and see visions and all that. But, in this movie, it's like, is she disturbed? Is she seeing visions? Or is she just being visited by these things that the movie says, like, are also a part of the real, are also interacting with, humanity?
First of all, I have to go back. I love the scene where Hokusai is relating his own experience.
Oh, the hands.
which is a lie. But the way that scene is animated, and when the hands are sort of like flying in front of the moon and rushing through the fields, it was just so beautiful. I got a lot of pleasure out of watching that scene. I think it's a good place to tie in the way this idea of perception ties into the family dynamic.
Yes.
Because I think what you have is, you have this whole family who has a gift for perception. And you have Hokusai passing it on to his daughter, Oe. And she in turn is passing on this ability for perception to Onao.
Yes.
And that's her gift to her, just as her father's. I really, that scene where her sister is playing in the snow. And of course, it's birthed out of this whole scene where they're walking through the snow and she's describing everything she's seeing and she's talking about the colors and her sister is playing with this boy and she has a flashback to herself with her father as a young girl trying to engage him in play in the snow. And I loved that scene, the flashback itself, because what you see is that he is not able to gift her in the same way that she gifts her sister. But what he does is he gives, in that moment, he does engage with her and he gives her the gift that he is able to give her, which is that they stop playing and they sit down and he shows her something of how to translate what she's seeing around her onto the page. And so while the way he experiences his gift of perception, he's very uncomfortable navigating it with his youngest daughter who's blind, because that is such a stumbling block for him. It's like he is incapable of giving her what she needs. But you have Oe, who has the perfect gift to give her sister, to pass that on to her sister. And I just thought that dynamic was painful, of course, because as a parent, you see a parent not engaging with their child and it's so sad. But at the same time, it felt very real too. And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't make him a villain in the movie. It makes him sort of handicapped in his own way. This idea that everyone has a blind spot. Blind. I mean, literally, blindness is kind of the image that you get, but he has this blind spot. He can't make himself do this. He doesn't understand how. OA has her blind spots. She does not know how to translate in the movie this idea of passion. She's very technically correct. And she's still learning. She doesn't know how to bring balance to her paintings in the same way that her father does, which is what he's trying to show her. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Onao has her literal blindness that she's trying to overcome. So each of them is trying to overcome their limitations to the best way they know how. And you get a sense, of course, because historically, Hokusai really did say, and I'm going to read the quote, "From the age of 6, I had a passion for copying the form of things, and since the age of 50, I have published many drawings. Yet of all I drew by my 70th year, there is nothing worth taking into account. At 73 years, I partly understood the structure of animals, birds, insects, and fishes, and the life of grasses and plants. And so, at 86, I shall progress further. At 90, I shall even further penetrate their secret meaning. And by 100, I shall perhaps truly have reached the level of the marvelous and divine. When I am 110, each dot, each line will possess a life of its own." And he really did lament on his deathbed if he could just have another 10 years, or 5 even, he could be a real painter. So
I thought of this, by the way, when Hara was talking. Like, whenever he was like, no, I'm not an artist. Oh, this is like what Tetsuzo says at the end of the movie.
Yes, you have this sense in each character, each of the main characters, each of the members of the family. This idea of just constantly striving, of finding your fulfillment in your perception, but then trying to overcome the limitations that you have on yourself. That was beautiful.
And each of these characters has, as you say, blind spots and limits, but almost because of them, the things that they can see and the perception and perspective that they do have is like enhanced. Like, so Onao, she's blind, of course, she can't see, but she still relates to the world around her, but relates in this different way. Like, her sort of perception set would be fundamentally different than ours, and she picks up on lots of things that people with sight do not pick up on. And I think this is actually really a helpful thing to think about when you're thinking about what the movie wants to say about the spiritual and the otherworldly, because in a way it's analogous to that, where you have some people that relate to the world differently and they can pick up on that. Like, their perception set will be different than someone like the Brazen, who doesn't have access to that, right? That's his blind spot weakness. But he does have a keen ability to imitate what he likes, and he makes a fair bit of money from doing that, it seems.
Yes.
So everybody, I think the more that we talk about this, like, just perception and what it is, like, it's so important to the movie, and in the movie kind of dealing with it, it also deals with, like, the fact that reality is so huge and big. Like, be it Oe, Tetsuzo, Onai, Brazen, like, nobody has the complete picture. There are things that we're not seeing, but the other people see, not because they're wrong, but because they're there and they have access to it, and just we can't see it. And even at the end of the movie, and we're spoiling things now, by the way, Onao, excuse me, she gets sick and she passes away, and the one of the last parts of the movie is Oe talking to her. One might say praying to her, I suppose, but I think this is more of that message that this hard divide that we might want to put between natural, supernatural, past and present, living and dead. It's just a veil that is accessible. We're all still part of the same plane. Maybe different planes, but part of the same existence and reality. Like, she's still talking to Onao. And even at the end, where her future self kind of has a narration and talks about things that are happening in the past, almost as if she's there sort of seeing it. I think that's more of the blurring, like, things that, realities that we'd want to put a hard line, like natural and supernatural, past and future. You have future her that's present in the movie talking about past her, or what we perceive as present her, right? Because we're in the moment, we're taking this in, as the character is experiencing it.
And I want to go back to what you said too about the heightened sense of perception that you can get, that can flow out of your limitations.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the way that there was a moment where Onao was on the bridge with her sister because she loves bridges. Her father painted a lot of bridges. Mm-hmm. And you have, she's her sense of smell, she's smelling things. Mm-hmm. Earlier in the movie, her father is speaking to, I believe it was Zenjiro.
Right.
And telling him, his people aren't real and they crumple because they're just not real at all. But that he likes the way his drawings smell.
Right. That's right.
So you have this theme of smelling, of like alternate means of perception, again, between the father and the daughter who have no meaningful physical connection, but they have this spiritual connection, this shared ability. And I like the way that was expressed through this idea of smell. Another thing I want to talk about are the differences and similarities personality-wise between father and daughter. Because you have this father who is depicted as, this sort of showman. She calls him a nutty old man at the very beginning of the movie. We know these stories about him now, of his self-promotion in court and the stunts kind of that he would pull to get attention. Although at the same time, in the movie, he's very sort of flat.
Yes.
In his expressions and his, and so is she. You have this very staid, very calm, very almost cold, and cold is the word I would use, except when she is with her sister. And I thought that was so interesting that you have all these young men who are interested in her, that are obviously sort of trying to eke some sort of response out of her. She has a little bit of a response to, what is his name, Chuck? Starts with an H.
I don't remember. He's a very tall art student.
Yes, the fishmonger. That's how I kept referring to him in my notes. And her sister sees her emotion, so to speak, while they're on the bridge and meet with this young man. But it was so interesting that her feelings toward him were not enough to conquer the disgust she felt by about his admiration for some of Brazen's work. Like, the things that she deep down, and I think you see in the conclusion of the movie, that really moved her the most were her relation with her sister and her father. Yeah. And her art. And everything else, it was just so much, flotsam and jetsam. She wasn't, she felt something, again, for this young man, but between his just absolute effrontery of giving credit where it was not due in her mind, and then appearing with another young woman, even in that scene where she sees them together and there's this emotion under the surface, there's just nothing again. The only time after that you eke out that sort of emotion is when she's with her sister, when you really see her relax, when she's working, and when she sees fire. Which I think is such an interesting counterpoint to what you see as the sort of cold, passive on the surface nature of how she carries herself, but her obsession with fire just destroying things.
I loved that because I think they mention fire and also storms. Like, I think Tetsuzo talks about a storm being one of the first things he saw, a dragon in the clouds. Like, these violent natural weather phenomena sort of disrupting like everyday happenings, like those things being the things that like kind of capture their imagination.
Yes, and that bring in that inspiration. It's sort of the violence and the and I mean again the complete opposite of how they're carrying themselves. That sort of prompts them into this creative space. And again, in his interview, Hara was saying that it's very Edo. This idea that you have this very calm, passive sort of surface, and underneath are these roiling, kind of boiling emotions. But the way they're depicted, they're there, but it's so subtle, and you become aware of them based on these very subtle, quiet cues, which really appeals to me. I mean, I just love that. I love subtlety in art. And
I think that was life back then, probably as well too, like relational.
Yes, those are Edo. Yeah. Which is again why that period is so important. But yes, that you do have these, that every time inspiration sort of comes down, it's the wind just picking up. It's a demon running down the street with a cart, sort of in flame, approaching where the painting is taking place. It's the door blowing in when her sister sort of makes her presence known after she's died. It's nature, it's storm, it's violence, it's fire. It's the opposite of everything that is going on in society and outwardly.
You were talking about the characterizations and of Tetsuzo and Oe, and I just focusing on Oe, I adored the way she was played and depicted in this movie. We should mention played by a voice actress who has never done anything else. This is her. I don't know. I don't have a lot of information at hand. I don't know if this is her debut role as a 2015 project. It's 2017 nearing its end now. You'd think that if she was in the industry, she would have gotten more work. Or I suspect this is like a person who doesn't normally do this, and they wanted to just bring in because she fit what the production staff wanted for the role. That would be my supposition. But regardless, like you were saying, the flat
affect,
that demeanor of Oe, almost a sort of like indifference bordering on repugnance at times for the world and people and their bad opinions and bad art. Like it was played so well and drawn so well. One of the first shots when she's watching her father complete this dragon and she's smoking a pipe, her just kind of intense expression is really, really well.
Can I interject here? One of the first notes I wrote was those eyebrows, dude. Because eyebrows were very prominent in character design. But when we were watching the special features, they made a special point that her eyes were supposed to be very intense.
Powerful eyes.
And I think the strength of her brow, it really played into this. And she had a bit of a strong jaw, I thought. And I think that is somewhere where, yes, the character design was speaking to the character of the character. It was so tightly tied in.
This is also a thing that I'm reading a comic right now called Battle Angel Alita, and what puts it over the top is the eyes of the main character and how expressive they are. And I think that's the case here. Even though she's indifferent a lot of the time and she's cold, there's still a range of expressions of indifferent and cold almost. It felt so lifelike, and just seeing her also go to a festival or fair with a guy that was interested in her, and let him buy her flowers and food, and she's just kind of whatever, I will do this because I have nothing to do right now. I'm waiting on another thing to happen, another scheduled appointment. And then at one point, probably the funniest part of the movie, which has some funny moments. It's a really nice mix of, I think, family drama and comedy. The probably the best joke is when he asked what she wished for at the wishing fountain, and she says a successful birth. Like,
yes.
Even though...
Yes, that dry humor.
Yeah, totally deadpan.
Yes.
Even though she is, not with child, not seeing anyone. I think a virgin, and you mentioned her dedication to her art. This lady was willing to lose her virginity at a brothel to, I don't know if a brothel is the right word, to a male prostitute for the sake of her art.
Well, and I think that whole, all of that arc with the young men and the interest and then the attempt at, feeling something sensual, I think it's like you said, it was her trying to overcome what she perceived as a handicap.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to be able to interject the sensual into her art. So even those sort of like stirrings of relationship were for her to be viewed as in service of her art, so, and in the end, I liked how in the end, what drew real sort of passion from her on the page was being able to depict her sister, which is where her emotion really lay. So it sort of culminated in a ceasing of attempting this thing that just was not working for her and channeling her energies instead to something that she really had feelings about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I loved that. While we're talking about the male prostitute, I thought the contrast between him and the courtesan was really interesting.
Yeah.
Because again, you did have this caste society, and any occupation that was seen as sort of contrary to the tenets of Buddhism was like, they called them non-human or filthy. Mm. And while the courtesan was not practicing a very dissimilar kind of occupation, she had this dignity because money, I'm assuming, and the way it changed hands and the way it sort of fed into entertainment. But it was a very unique niche in that society, whereas you had many, many, many prostitutes who were just, yes, seen as filth. And I think this young man really was obviously part of that aspect of the caste rather than the higher ups. So that was an interesting, difference there. But also, I really thought it was so interesting the way when they animated his relating of his dream that he had of the gods just trampling everything.
Oh, yes.
The way it was depicted as this sort of messy black and white brushwork, it was very crude. And then immediately after, you see her visualizing the same image, and it's beautiful. It's cast in this very bright light, and everything is colored. And the statue tramples her. And then the next scene, you see her bathed in this bright light, and she's blinded by it. I think that's another image of the difference between those who are inspired and perceive and those who don't.
This is the first time this is occurring to me. You're so right.
Because in his dream, it's pure destruction, and it's sort of ugly and just
just kind of line art.
Yes. But for her, it's this beautiful thing, and she herself is trampled, and yet she comes out of it in the light, kind of. And I loved that moment of the movie. It was incredible. It's that subtlety, that quiet kind of juxtaposition that it's easy to miss, but it captures the whole message of the film. If you can even reduce it to a message.
Can we talk about the best character in the movie?
The puppy.
The puppy! So cute.
That was a cute puppy.
Just the puppy wanders into their life, and they kind of keep it around.
Everyone needed that puppy, I think.
Yeah. Everybody has a moment where they're snuggling it.
Yes.
And you see it grow, and it functions as
when
kind of a clock.
Brazen is kind of, like he's kind of down about his abilities, and the puppy's just, he's like, it's okay, dude.
They hang out the most.
Yes.
Like when Oe comes back to get a comb for her sort of rendezvous with the fishmonger that she is attracted to. Like, Brazen and the puppy are just laying there on their backs, their legs sticking in the air. It's very charming.
Yes. And I think it kind of sets him up against this idea of being just sort of puppy-like, like not like cute, appealing. Mm-hmm. You know, he has an appeal as an artist, including as a character, and you know, maybe he's not the best, but he can get by on the charm of what he's able to do.
What did you think of their kind of their living conditions? I thought that was a really like a efficient way to characterize them. And she narrated this like they weren't living in what I would call squalor, but they never cooked or cleaned. Their house was just like art supplies, places to sleep, and crumpled up paintings or drawings that they weren't. And that was it. And she was totally comfortable with that. Like, very much living for art and kind of not much else. And in some ways it made like the life of an artist during this time look kind of fun and interesting, because you just, you know, made money to kind of keep yourself from your art, and then you were free to kind of do whatever you needed to do to be inspired and eat and entertain yourself, you know, as long as you kept up the painting work. And yeah, their life did look quite peaceful, and which is something I feel like most Japanese period movies I see involve some sort of sword fighting.
Well, and I think too, though, it did also illustrate the idea that while they were waiting for inspiration, and while they were artists in that sense, they were also working on commission. They were working on deadlines. You know, there's a very unsexy aspect to all of it, in which to a degree, it doesn't matter if you're inspired or not. You've got to get the work out. The people who are paying you are waiting. And,
relationship to anime and anime production. Like, it's art is product.
And very early on, and it always has been.
Always has been.
And very early on, you get this sense of the power of the people who are wanting these pieces, because you have the distressed messenger who's like, I don't think he's gonna want your heads, you know, but maybe. So
I think he'll want me to kill myself too, which seems like it would be bad.
Yes. I mean, but those are the stakes. So it was.
I didn't want to ruin our watching experience. I might take back, like, this might be the funniest scene in the movie. I think it's like maybe the second or third scene when Tetsuzo's finishing up painting the dragon and she's smoking and flicks fire onto it, and it looks beautiful, this drawing, and you know, some ashes from her pipe get flicked onto it. And then, interestingly, that's the only scene we see her smoke in. I don't think we see her smoke anymore. Maybe this was another sort of commitment to art thing, where it's like, well, this one time it, you know, fucked things up, and then she just cut it out but like, yeah, like the painting is burned, and like, no emotion on his face. Tetsuzo just gets up, puts his slippers on, leaves the house for hours. Exactly what I would do if, like, I don't know, this podcast became corrupted or something right as I was finishing it.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, that dragon coming down was you know, to inspire her to create the dragon, was that first instance that we see of this otherworldliness. This is just a little Easter eggy kind of thing that I caught because I had read about the history before the movie. During the scene where the courtesan is, you know, her head is leaving her body, Hokusai makes reference to the ghost stories of someone named Bakken.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That was a Chinese ghost story.
Well, what is so interesting is that he actually, in 1807, he collaborated with... He was a novelist, Bakken, who did, and they were, and I think this is such an interesting illustration of how different times were in terms of the prioritizing of the arts. an artist, like visual artist. So they were collaborating on this illustrated series, and they clashed with each other. They were not getting along. And the publisher dropped Bakken and kept Hokusai on as the illustrator. That would just never happen today. Wow. But the visual was just so much more important that they just...
I suppose.
Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting.
So, but anyway, they really had collaborated at that point, which I thought was a fun little... I don't know. It was just fun.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about the family dynamics. But last kind of question I think I have for you about the art and perception and reality, that dimension of the film is going back to the painting that Oe painted that caused its owner's wife to be disturbed. Tetsuzo said that he looked at the painting and said, okay, I see what's wrong here. You're good. And because you know you're good, like, that's your problem. That's what's actually keeping you from being great. This painting is incomplete. There are loose ends. Mm-hmm. And then he painted, I think, a Buddha on the beach. Yes,
I will actually...
So, like, what are the loose ends that he was referring to there? And why do you think that kind of quelled the owner's issues with the painting?
Oh, let me tell you something.
Okay.
Because I did look this up. So, I think the larger point that he was making was, if you have too much confidence in your own ability, you're not going to be looking for the areas in which you're weak, and you will be incapable of improving. I think that's what he was trying to tell her, was that you have to have a sense of humility,
Which she took to mean, I guess I should go see a male prostitute so I can make sensual drawing.
But I think that moment was important for her, because I think it shifted her focus. I think she had the humility to recognize that this was not where she was going to flourish, and she needed to focus on the areas that she was going to flourish in. And I mean, this is all purely fictional, obviously. She probably continued to paint the shunga or whatever, the erotica. But for the purposes of the story, yes, she left behind her quest to be perfect in an area and just sort of painted out of her own emotion, which is what she was lacking in the first place.
Yes.
So the Buddha that was added to the picture, I thought this was so interesting, and it's again out of this idea of balance. You have something called Pure Land Buddhism. He is what you would call the Amitabha. I mean, some of these words are Indian because Buddhism has those roots.
Exactly.
So none of y'all know how to pronounce this,
China
so I don't care. Amitabha, Pure Land Buddha, is who gets painted into that picture. And Pure Land Buddhism, basically the Pure Land is the idea of enlightenment. And I think what the painting needed to be balanced was hope.
It was a painting of hell. I should probably point that out.
Yes. It was pure hell. And by adding the hope of attainment of enlightenment to the painting, peace was restored in its viewers.
Yeah. Can I just say, who the hell is like, hey, I know what's a good idea. Let me commission a painting of hell and then hang it in my wife's room. Like, what a terrible idea. But hey, I mean, we've already talked about, like, he probably, gave her, when they got married, a painting of an octopus pleasure woman.
Right.
Culture's different. It's different.
Yes. That painting reminded me so much of the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch. Go Google him and look at his paintings of hell. They are horrific. And interestingly, he was Dutch. Yes, it all comes around.
Wow. Okay.
So yes, he did these similarly just hellish hellish, haha, because it's hell. No, but seriously, they're awful. They're grotesque in a similar way that this painting was grotesque.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder about the Dutch influence. Oh, another moment. I just want to call attention to this moment of the animation. When she was... I loved that there was this juxtaposition, again, between the moment that Oe is running to see the fire, and the fire is destroying everything. And then the next scene is her with her sister walking in the snow. And then in the distance, you see smoke rising. But it's just such a transition. And I think it's a transition in terms of mood, too, between her kind of being roiled up in this idea of the inspiration and all of the flames, the undercurrent of passion inside, to the sort of peace and comfort that her sister brings her. Oh, and I'm sorry, if I can just pull into this idea, okay, because it was incomplete earlier. You have...
like the hell painting.
You have the Onao, who smell is so important to her on the bridge in terms of her perceiving and overcoming her limitations. And you connect that to the fact that her father, he said, that he
liked the way the brazen drawings smell.
Yes, that he liked the way the brazen drawings smell. And there was also the moment when the fishmonger put his arm around Oe, and her first thought was for his smell and the relation of the scent of his skin. Anyway, it was clearly preoccupying her. So I knew there was another moment that smell connected all three of these characters. It's just another illustration of the way their perceptions are similar and the way all three of them are tied to this undercurrent of the other.
They did some, as you would probably expect more, they did some very tender things, I think, with touch, with Onao. They actually transitioned from the animation in the film to the famous wave painting. There's a really lovely scene of Oe and Onao being canoed. They're riding in a boat. They're going under a bridge. Again, she loves bridges, the little sister. So, but Oe has taken Onao's hand and is running it through the water, letting fish pass it by. Like, you get the sense that this is the first time maybe that they've done this, perhaps because she'd been sick earlier. I think she was staying with the Buddhist sister earlier in the film, so she didn't really, because I think Oe had to get permission to take her out at the beginning. So this now makes sense to me that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, and her feeling the snow, and then the one kind of, I thought, incredible scene when she puts her hands on her father's face. And for the father experiencing it, as soon as Onao's hands touch his face, everything else in the background goes black. It's like all there is that moment in his daughter's touch. I thought it was very well illustrated.
So I think that's a good transition to talk about Hokusai in general. Sorry, resting papers. As a father. And
oh boy.
And his
complicated.
His particular weaknesses. I mean, maybe I know we talked a little bit about everybody having their imperfections and their limitations. And it's interesting that the scene you're talking about when she reaches up to touch his face and it's just this powerful still moment. Next scene, his immediate reaction is to paint her something to ward off evil spirits. And you have, again, Oe kind of irritated with him and scornful of, she says that he's scared of sickness because he's weak. And, he is. That is his weakness. Obviously, throughout the movie, that's made clear.
And poor Onao, she understands, despite what her sister is telling her, I think she's pretty knowing about how her dad feels, and it's interesting. Well, not interesting. That's just such a shitty default word that I keep coming back to. When Tetsuzo, tries to do something for her in his own way, it doesn't make up for all the time that he wasn't there for her and that she felt neglected, and it doesn't undo the deep impression his absence has made, because the first thing she thinks is does he hate me? Because being sick is part of who she is, and it's immediately he wants to do this thing where he wants to change something, and she perceives everything he does as a push away, because that's what he's been doing. That's what she knows is her dad pushing her away and neglecting her, and even when he's there, she's looking for that as kind of the default mode.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the profound sadness of her little character is the fact that she doesn't... I don't think it's so much that she feels neglected as that she feels responsible for her father's avoidance. And she carries this weight that because he can't be around her because of how she is, that she won't be able to be a good daughter and she's going to go to hell. And the idea of hell and heaven and hell, does it exist? It's scattered throughout the movie. OA is coming back to this question over and over. It's interesting in light of that, the fact that she paints the image of hell without an image of hope in it. Right. It's almost like she has not reached a certain level of maturity, maybe, to see that as necessary, that balance. And I think that moment... I'm sorry, I keep going back to things. I feel like I should do things in chronological order because then I keep coming back to the same points. But that moment where she is with the male prostitute and they talk about, is there really heaven? And then he falls asleep on her, and she has her vision of his vision. And that's when she asks, is there really heaven or hell? Because repeatedly, at this point, she's asked the question, is there heaven? But it isn't until that moment that she asks, is there heaven or hell? It seems that hell is an easier concept for her to get her mind around until that moment. And we see hell coming up because of her sister being concerned about going there. And then it's in that moment after she asks that question that, she's stepped on, and then we open up and she's staring at the sun. So maybe that is a turning point for her somehow in her perception of heaven. I mean, I'm looking at my notes and I don't see... her sister mentions going to hell after that point, and she just pretty much is you're not going to, but she doesn't bring up the question again after that point. And the, the whole deal with the painting needing to have the Buddha added to it, happens before this. Right. So it seems like that whole idea culminates in this moment. Okay, just before Onao dies, and you have the scene where the mother is encouraging her to go tell her father to come see her. She's doing okay. She's not she's looking a lot better. Her color's been better when she's clearly, she's the worst off that we've seen her up to this point in the movie. And she complains to her mother about her father being a crybaby. And the mother, who's a very sort of understated character throughout, she verbalizes a connection with Hokusai, saying that she's a crybaby too. So there's some understanding of his weakness. And when Oe arrives to see her father and to ask him to come, and he says to her, she tries to get him to go by saying all the things that the mother said, and she tells him, "You're a lousy he tells her, "You're a lousy liar, and that's why you can't snag a man." I think that's the closest their sort of weaknesses. That's a moment where they're both kind of together. She's immediately been sort of castigating him for being a crybaby and too weak to come around sickness. And he is almost immediately after that saying she's a bad liar. And that's sort of the heart of her issue, is her desire to sort of express emotion that she hasn't felt. There's an insincerity behind those things because she can't connect with them in a certain way that she tries to force herself to. A lot of what we were talking about earlier, the sensual paintings, and she can't put herself in that space. But she tries to force it by sort of lying her way through it in a sense, by doing it anyway, and it just doesn't work. So I think that moment is a good one in the sense that they're sort of recognizing the insufficiencies in each other right in the same moment. And that's the moment when her sister dies, and in that moment, the wind starts to blow and the door is blown open, and
she comes in and places a single red flower.
It just sort of blows in, and the idea being, and of course, Hokusai says she made it here by herself.
It's so sad, and it's really hard for me to get past his weaknesses and like him, as a dad. Like, I do understand his point of view. I am sensitive to the fact that his character is weighed down by a lot of guilt over his daughter's blindness, in particular, more so than her illness even. And feels like, at one point he says that he feels like he's responsible for it, maybe because his sight and perception are so great.
Yes, and the quote is, maybe I was the one who stole her sight and her life. And I think it's interesting that, here, look, I'm using the word interesting again too. But hey, it's interesting. It's cool. It's significant.
Dope.
That the little girl carried so much responsibility for her inability to be a good daughter, at the same time that her father, in a sort of childlike way, is carrying responsibility for her ailment and feeling guilty as though he had something to do with it.
That's the thing, is like, you hit the nail on the head. The fact that he cannot get past it and shoulder that is a failing on him, and is childlike and immature. And thank God for Oe bringing some warmth to her sister's world, in the time that she had. And I'm sure her father suspected that she wouldn't live long, but guess what? She's your daughter, and even if you know that, it's your responsibility to care for her, and you should want to enrich her life as much as possible, because in her case, it really is not about the quantity. It's the quality of her remaining time, and the fact that she feels responsible for being a bad daughter and feels hellbound and everything like that. That's his fault, and it upsets me tremendously. And yes, he's a great artist and everything like that, and he's, a funny and like can be a good storyteller, and he's certainly not like a two-dimensional character or anything like that. It just like by the end of the movie, I was shouting along with OA, like for him to grow up and see his kid. Like, it was very upsetting to me.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it was hard to stomach. Very, very sad.
Humans, man.
I appreciate the powerful contrast between Hokusai laboring under this false burden that he had stolen his child's sight, and the consistent and loyal and beautiful efforts that OA made in actual life to give her sister sight. She wasn't, for OA, it didn't matter why she didn't see. That wasn't really a question to be wrestled with, or an obstacle that had to be gotten over before she could take action to give her sister sight in her own way. And it's very sort of narcissistic of him to this idea that he stole her life. Well, she had a beautiful life. Like, I understand again what he was getting at, but it just shows that he didn't appreciate
exactly
just the full value of her as a rich and complex and complete human being.
And he's robbing her of further quality. He is stealing her life in a sense. I'm taking a dramatic license with those words, but by not. There's a space for him. There's a him-shaped hole in her life that he could have filled so easily.
Yes. And the fact that he sees that in her death. What OA finds in her death, of course, is the ability to cast off her own quest, her own sort of futile quest to express a kind of passion that she doesn't connect with, and to take on art as an independent artist. Her father leaves her this painting to do. It's all hers, which I took to mean, don't do this one under my name. Like, it is all yours. And I don't think that's unintentional at all. And
right.
That in that moment, she starts to work on it. But before she does, she throws out all her drafts that she had been working on and just went out and talked with her sister. So, yeah, I think it's just an illustration that she has been able to cross this bridge with the help of her sister.
A bridge, you say?
A bridge, indeed, a bridge. Oh, bridges, so significant. And the next painting you see is the one that she's painted of her sister.
It was a beautiful painting.
So sister crosses over into death. Hokusai crosses over into some sort of realization of the actual guilt that he bore, sort of. And OA crosses over into this newfound ability to sort of take ownership of her own art.
Yeah. So the girl who loved bridges ends up being kind of a bridge for others to move into new phases of their lives.
An image that will stay with me that cements the unity of the three of them is the one where you see them together in the boat, in the wave. So the painting is Hokusai's, which invokes him in that scene. And then OA is putting her sister's hand in the water to give her that perception of water. They're all just kind of it's a representation of all of them, their strengths, I think. You know, we talked about the coming together of sort of their weaknesses and their insufficiencies, but I think that is a powerful image of the things they do right. You know, that he is excellent at helping OA see, and she is excellent at helping her sister see. And so
beautiful,
even though there's not the direct connection that you would want to see between Hokusai and Onao, she serves as that bridge, if we can bring that in again. She serves as that conduit between the two of them. And it's just sort of it's a system. You know, their family is a system. And God bless Mom. You know, she's in there. We didn't get a lot of her in here, but by golly, she cares about all of them. She seems to be a very peaceful presence in all of their lives.
Yes.
Even though I think she is an ex-wife in reality.
Yeah, I was unclear on the nature of their relationship.
I mean, we're taking some pretty solid historical liberties, I think, with this whole story of the movie in particular. But yeah.
One thing I wanted to note is that as a member myself of a fairly dysfunctional family, and as the oldest of two siblings, there were things that I appreciated about the movie kind of making it feel like OA was in many ways like holding the family together. Like she was like kind of going back and forth between all three, you know, the rest of them, and trying in some ways to bring them together, but like, I mean, not super forcing it with like the mom.
I think that's fair. And I think as we do, you know, I think it takes a certain amount of maturity in our life to appreciate the people in our family as the imperfect humans that they are, and to come to a realization that just because they maybe weren't everything that you needed or wanted them to be, they were everything they could be, and that served a purpose in your life, and you just come to appreciate your parents in particular as actual fully realized human beings, and it changes the way you see a lot of things, I think, when you look back.
Just imagine if instead of Onao, it was OA that met an untimely demise. I mean, she was the beating heart of the family. Like, the mom would be kind of cut off from Tetsuzo, who would never see his daughter or have reason to reconnect with, you know, with their mother. Like and he would be despondent because his one true protege was now gone. Like, she like added so much to all of their lives, and like really was the key member of that unit. She made it the unit. Without her, they're just mostly like just these three separate lives. Not the role that the not parent should be filling. But it's often forced upon people.
But it is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is important to realize for the movie's purposes.
Yes.
You know, there's the recognition of the ways, you know, like Hokusai wants OA to be able to do, you know, don't think too highly of yourself, because you won't be able to recognize the ways in which you are falling short in your craft. So on the one hand, you know, yes, be aware. On the other hand, realize that you aren't going to just fix everything in one fell swoop. You know, it is a process, and a process that may take a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything can't be ideal, unfortunately.
You know what's really important?
What's that?
That we have neglected to talk about to this point?
Wait, we talked about the puppy already.
Or the rockin' soundtrack.
That's right. That, like, scene at the beginning.
Yeah. And at the end.
But, like, yes, I don't know if it's the same song, but, like, the one at the beginning.
But it's rockin' at the beginning and the end.
It might have been Taking Care of Business when she's running across the wooden bridge. I know.
Yeah, I feel like it's the stock version.
The royalty-free TCP.
Yes. That, I mean, not that I don't deeply appreciate it. If there's one thing about the movie that maybe didn't quite like,
it was a little discordant.
Just those moments where it just happened. And at the end too, where I was just like, I don't know if this fits my mood right now. And the very abrupt change at the very end to like modern day, just for like a second, that was interesting.
Well, I thought that was another little gesture towards this idea of connection, that time not being a separator of beings in reality, because they showed the same place in Japan, but modern, and super slick boat going under that same bridge. Like, more of this idea of like reality's bigger than you think, and connection.
And maybe and the spiritual realm was so recurrent throughout the film and such an important presence. The thought of all of their presences just sort of lingering on and around the bridge, and, living on as they do in their art, maybe in some mystical sense, in many ways,
Yeah. Yeah. I thought a lot of the same things I thought when I was reading Charles Williams all those years ago, when we were watching this, about individuals' lives being connected over distance, time, life,
You're
through
thinking
death,
of Descent into Hell.
Descent into Hell, yeah, absolutely. It is when the idea is put forward in fiction, it's one that, or even I think it's being put forward, but the author didn't intend it necessarily. Like, I gravitate toward it because it's one that I'm pretty fascinated by.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I mean, that Descent into Hell, which is totally a rabbit trail, but, it kind of takes its root in a Shelley poem, I want to say. The Magus Zoroaster, my dead child, met an image of himself walking in the garden. And Zoroastrianism was very mystical, and it's, Babylonian kind of mysticism, but yeah, you have mysticism at play here too. And I think we have talked the fuck through this, and
in our own roundabout way,
no stone unturned. Might need to remove some stones from the garden, like probably turned over a few too many stones, repeated a few things several hundred times. But yes, I enjoyed the heck out of that.
Yeah, let's give our kind of final thoughts, summations, and then we can wrap it up.
Conclusions suck.
Well, I can go first then and just say, like, I know that at least in my experience, there hasn't been like a lot of podcast coverage about this film. What I had heard was pretty brief and kind of I feel like undersold the movie, because I think this is a really excellent movie. I think thematically it is a tight package. There's lots of parallels between the characters. There's lots of amazing juxtapositions. There are some important messages that are fully fleshed out and given a lot of time and space to breathe the themes. Well, it's not like the most amazing film visually that I've ever seen, but it's very bright and colorful and pretty. Certainly not one where you will be bored visually. I think the art design itself is quite good, like the storyboarding, the layouts. the architecture, and we've already talked about, some of the character designs being quite good. I mean, it's a story about an artist, as a family drama, as a period piece about later Edo. I think it's wildly successful on all those fronts. Not going to buy the soundtrack, but that's okay. It's a wonderful movie, and it's one that I do think, if you haven't seen it, listen to the first part of this podcast where Annie details a lot of the history, and there's that one.
Fast forward it if you if you feel the urge as well.
I think knowing that will enrich your viewing, and I think this is a movie that, at least I feel like, you can come back to. I certainly want to watch it again. I think there are things that I will pick up on this time, but I totally recommend it. Absolutely.
He speaks for all of us. No.
Where is that from? What is that?
I don't remember. What is that from?
The cowbell sketch. Horatio Sands character.
Yes.
He speaks for all of us.
The movie was beautiful. It was simple and quiet, but powerful. Just the kind of movie I love. It was such an interesting contrast too to Paprika, which was my last viewing. I mean, just if movies were colors, that one is all red, obviously. This one was just blues, very just calm, quiet. I loved it. Would definitely recommend.
Well, I guess that is going to do it for this episode of Companion Piece. Annie, thanks so much for watching the movie and for all your outstanding contributions, your research. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes to Warui Deshou. That is kind of the umbrella that this podcast will be going under. That's kind of the main longer podcast that I do with Shadon and Vorgalia. You can subscribe to that on iTunes, or SoundCloud, or follow the account on Twitter to get updates as well when new episodes come out if you don't use a podcatcher. And it's WARUI DESHOU. If you have feedback for Annie or myself, you can email us at wateruideshow@gmail.com or tweet at me at The Subtle Doctor on Twitter, and I will pass those along to the waifu here.
Which means he will read the nice ones to me and not tell me about the bad ones.
So far, no bad ones. So far, we're in the clear.
Let's not tempt.